Hey guys, how's it going? Shabbat Shalom. Hopefully you can all see me and hear me okay. We had some fun with a somewhat faulty microphone last time, so I got a new and improved microphone. Um, Looks like we're getting levels on it. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Let me know if you can see and hear me okay. Hey David, nice to see you. Hey, what's up, Emily? How's it going? Roger from Nevada. What's up, Jungle Jerry? Hey, Nicole from Oklahoma. What's up, Tiki from Arkansas? Big G, Big Daddy G. I'm 5 for 5 according to G. Awesome. All right, guys, more volume. I already have the volume up all the way. Maybe I can adjust it on the mic. How's that? I have my mic up as high as it'll go, and the level in OBS as high as it'll go too. So, sorry if I'm still a little too soft. I can talk loud. I'm Italian, guys. So, if you need me to yell and gesticulate a lot, I can do that. No problem. What's up, Terry from Canada? Denise from Concord, New Hampshire. Hampshire. What's up, Home Mom from Lori from Pennsylvania? Volume is fine. Glad to hear that, Victoria. What's up, Laodicean Girl in the UK? ROCK in the UK. I think that's actually USA, but whatever. Alrighty, y'all. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get this party started. First of all, Shabbat Shalom, Gut Shabbos. However you may say that if you're Ashkenazi or otherwise. Once again, it's a big wow for the past about week or 2 weeks of events here. I was last with you 2 weeks ago at the beginning of what is now being called the 12-day war between Israel and Iran. The first all-out, knockdown, drag-out, gloves-off war between the state of Israel and, I'll talk a little closer to the mic. How's this? Like a podcaster. Between Israel, the Islamic Republic of Iran, formerly called, and the state of Israel. If you were paying attention at any point in the last 2 weeks, if you even managed to flip on the evening news one night, you will know that was possibly the most one-sided, lopsided military conflict in modern history. The paper tiger of Iran was completely exposed. The emperor has no clothes, and the Iranian regime was completely exposed as a fraudulent so-called regional power. It really goes to show, once again, in modern warfare, it's about technology, it's about communication, it's about coordination. It's not about the size of your army or how big you talk on Twitter. Looking at you, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. Doesn't matter. In the end, if your army is well trained, well supplied, and well equipped with good technology, they're going to take the day every day. And boy, did the state of Israel do exactly that in this conflict. You all know, if you were following The Wire on Twitter, in the first 4 hours of the conflict, Israel had taken out almost half of Iran's top military leadership, most of its top nuclear scientists, all of its remaining S-300 air defense systems, and several other key military and government sites throughout the capital of Tehran and throughout the country. Within 4 hours, all of Western Iran, including the capital of Tehran, was rendered completely defenseless. And the Israeli Air Force, the IAF, had complete dominance of the skies over Western Iran. After just a few hours into the first day of the conflict. That is unprecedented, unheard of, far beyond anybody's wildest expectations, including Israel's. Had no idea that it would go that well. What we know now is the Israeli military was training for those opening hours of the conflict for years. They had been training their pilots and their comms and their command and control and Navy and everyone else for years to prepare for just the first few hours of that conflict, and they executed it flawlessly. Just amazing. So, at that point, it was just a turkey shoot. The Israeli Air Force had complete dominance of Iranian airspace and could do what they want, when they wanted, at the pace that they wanted to do it. And that's exactly what they did. They systematically, they almost didn't have, it was a matter of like which targets to pick first. There's almost too many targets to choose from. And so they kind of had to prioritize down the list over the following 12 days, hence the name the 12-Day War, hitting all the nuclear sites, hitting Iranian Revolutionary Guard sites, hitting bases for the Basiji, which are the sort of like internal security police that enforce Sharia law, that were responsible for all the human rights violations against Iranian citizens over the past 5 decades or so, and which have taken kind of a central role in recent street demonstrations after the beating death of Masha Amani. They prioritized all those targets, and obviously, most of all, Iran's missile production and storage facilities for ballistic missiles, and even above that, Iran's nuclear research and development and production sites, including the top 3 sites, the crown jewels of Iran's nuclear program, the Natanz and Fordow sites, where almost all of the advanced centrifuges and most of all of the centrifuges were located, and Isfahan, which was a key development site. As far as we know, at this point, we've gotten kind of mixed signals. The Defense Intelligence Agency for the U.S. military has said in their very preliminary assessment, which they call quote-unquote low confidence, that there was at least collapse of the entry points at the Fordow site after the U.S. Air Force struck that site with 12 GBU-57 or massive ordnance penetrator bunker buster bombs, second to the last day of the conflict, I believe it was last week. The initial assessment was that site was at least partially destroyed, depending on who you ask, including now a CIA assessment that Brett McGurk shared on CNN earlier today, possibly completely destroyed. So that is the site. Both Fordow and Natanz, where most of the enriched uranium production was taking place. Most of the centrifuge cascades were housed, and we talked a little bit about that last time. And it's believed, probably more likely than not at this point, that those sites were completely destroyed. Something else that we're learning about the U.S. military side of that operation is that the massive ordnance penetrator bunker buster bomb was developed in its early stages, going all the way back to 2009 during the Obama administration, for this exact purpose, this exact operation. The understanding that Iran was building advanced centrifuge cascade farms, so to speak, under hundreds of meters of granite and reinforced concrete in these underground caves, and that one day the U.S. military might need to take them out. And so all the way back, 15 plus years ago, there was a decision made at the highest levels of our government, the White House and the Pentagon, to develop this weapon for this specific purpose. It was designed to do exactly what it did last week. And according to Brett McGurk, who was very heavily involved in that program, both in the Obama and first Trump administration and Biden administration, did exactly what it was supposed to do, which was through GPS targeting, go into the shafts of both of these, both of the shafts, the entry shafts for the Fordow facility, and penetrate as far as it could into the rock and or concrete, and then a second one right behind it, dropping right into the same spot, and apparently a third and a fourth even. Don't know if there were separate locations where those the strikes occurred at the Fordow facility, but 12 in all within a matter of minutes, striking the Fordow facility, creating this sort of apocalyptic, almost like nuclear explosion mushroom cloud. If you saw the videos of it, the amateur video that was posted shortly afterward on Twitter and Telegram that we shared on the wire, it's believed that at this point, like I said, more likely than not, that that site is out of production. It's out of operation now for the foreseeable future. Whether all of the centrifuges inside were just damaged or completely destroyed, it's going to take the Iranian government at least a while to dig out those sites and see what happened, and if they're cooperating still with the International Atomic Energy Agency for that agency to get down and observe what's happened. So, pretty amazing, guys. This, as far as the military action goes on the Israeli side and the American side, went almost as well as we could have possibly hoped, and even better. I keep pounding the table or the microphone, or so. I'll try not to pound anything. It might be me just making, I don't have a pop screen on this thing yet. Maybe I should get one. So you might just hear me popping as I pronounce my P's. Anyway, I got it as loud as I can. Sorry, guys. I got the levels all the way up. So I will try to lean down a little bit and talk like this and just be a hunchback for the rest of this session. So that is the military situation. As most of you know, Iran fired somewhere in the neighborhood of 550 ballistic missiles back from Iran towards Israel. That's really Iran's only recourse. It doesn't have a good air force. It has a very outdated air force. They're mostly running F-14 Tomcats that they got from the United States government before the fall of the Shah in the 1970s. And Israel, for its part, is running F-35s, F-16s, F-18s. They can just run circles around the Iranian Air Force all day. So there's no point in even attempting a dogfight there. There's no chance of them reaching Israel for airstrikes. There's no chance of Iran's ground forces traversing the entire region across Iraq and Syria. No way they'd even make it that far to the border of Iraq. And they don't really have, of Israel, and they don't really have a navy to speak of that can make it all the way up, the Red Sea coast to southern Israel, to the coast of southern Israel. So all they could do was lob missiles. And being that Israel immediately began prioritizing ballistic missile launchers, and considering the fact that those missile launchers have to, come out of their facility and drive and state to where they're going to be staged to launch, and then it takes anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes to fuel those missiles, because they're liquid fueled, to launch them to Israel. There's like 20 minutes plus of exposure for the Israeli Air Force, again, in uncontested skies, to just pick them off. And that's what they did. Well over 100, possibly 150 to 200, over half, possibly 2/3 of Iran's medium and intermediate range ballistic missile launching vehicles were taken out during this conflict in these 12 days. Iran could just barely even get, by the end of the conflict, to get half a dozen of these things off before their launchers were taken out. So early on in the conflict, we had a few waves in the first few days of 100 or so at a time. By the end of the conflict, it was 5, 10, 15 per wave. And again, just goes to show that dominating the skies is key to any modern conflict with air superiority. And the Israelis and the American Air Force obviously had that all day long and twice on Sunday over the skies of Iran. Unfortunately, and again, I posted this on the wire yesterday, something called the Israeli anomaly, where this goes all the way back to the Arab-Israeli wars and even the Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein lobbed 39 Scud missiles at Israel's cities in 1981, back way before there was anything as called missile defense, or viable missile defense anyway. There was no way to shoot those Scuds down, and of 14 that impacted cities, they killed only 2 people during that conflict over 30 years ago. In this conflict, out of over 500 ballistic missiles that were lobbed at Israeli cities, for the most part the Tel Aviv metro area and Jerusalem, where over half of the nation's population lives. Also at Haifa, where another good chunk of the population of the country lives. 95% were intercepted by the Arrow 3 and David Sling missile defense systems, which are designed for medium and long-range missile. The smaller Iron Dome batteries for short range, that's like Hamas and Hezbollah rockets. Still, 95% interception rate is excellent, exactly what would be expected, but not 100%, obviously. And when you're talking about over 500 missiles, that's 30, 40, 50 that make it through the defenses and will impact targets. In some cases, they miss the target and they're off in the field somewhere, or in other cases, they impact inside a city. And unfortunately, we did see that multiple times. Even then, the Israeli anomaly surfaced, and there were several miraculous cases of ballistic missiles impacting parking lots near daycare centers, but the daycare center happened to be empty, impacting a hospital in Beersheba early on in the conflict, but they had either just moved a lot of patients out of a certain wing of the hospital, they got the direct hit, or maybe there were other patients in a different wing where there was a direct hit but only injuries, no deaths. Just amazing, guys, that although we don't want to see any deaths of civilians on either side, something like only 28 Israeli civilians died. And most of those in 3 strikes that we talked about on the wire yesterday, or we posted about on the wire yesterday. One in Beersheba. At the very last day, one of the very last waves of the conflict, ballistic missile impacted an apartment building directly. It killed 4 people, including a 95-year-old Holocaust survivor. There was a strike in Bat Yam, which is a suburb of Tel Aviv, that killed, I think it was 10 people, including 4 from a Ukrainian Jewish family that had just immigrated away from that conflict in Ukraine to get their 9-year-old daughter special medical treatment in Israel. And unfortunately, she and several other of her family members were killed in that strike. And then an Arab Israeli family in an Arab town that's in a suburb of Haifa in northern Israel along the coast, 4 members of that family killed in a strike. So unfortunately, still tragedy here in this conflict for Israel. There's estimates I've seen anywhere between 600 and 1,000 Iranian casualties, about half of those being either military or IRGC targets. And throughout the conflict, I didn't mention, as the days went on, Israel, either through means on the ground with the Mossad launching drones from factories they had built inside Iran weeks before, another amazing story, or through airstrikes, or even through, it seems like, them working on the ground with Iranian resistance groups through shootings or car bombings or other modes of assassination, killed multiple other, we're thinking anywhere between 30 to 40 top Iranian generals in the regular military, top IRGC figures, especially IRGC figures in the Quds force, which is the force that works with other foreign proxy forces in places like Lebanon, Hezbollah, or formerly in Syria. They got kicked out after al-Sharaa came to power, or in Iran with the Islamic resistance forces there, the Shia, Iranian-sponsored Shia militias there, or the Houthis in Yemen. So Israel kind of focused in on those IRGC leaders, assassinated many of them, assassinated more. I think it was between 15 and 20 top Iranian nuclear scientists altogether, destroyed Iranian research, data repositories. And so through all these means over the course of 12 days, just completely gutted the IRGC and top military command structure of Iran. So altogether, around anywhere between 600 to 1,000 Iranian casualties. We may never know the real number there. Probably at least half, maybe even more of those being military. Unfortunately, there were probably hundreds of civilian casualties. As always, with all of its conflicts, Israel, not Home Front Command, but Mossad and military intelligence calling in some cases or texting local Iranians or sending them alerts through apps or dropping flyers, leaflets, whatever it may be, warning them to stay away from certain neighborhoods. Now even warning them still to this day to stay away from certain IRGC leaders to avoid civilian casualties. But, you know, if they bomb a house with an IRGC leader and his family's in there, unfortunately, sadly, they all die. And those are decisions that every military has to make in wartime. There's a way of doing that according to international laws of conflict. And unfortunately, civilian casualties are a reality of that. And so we pray for the people of Iran, including those kinds of people that are even very close to the top leadership that may be caught in the crossfire. And we pray for their safety and protection, and we pray for the safety and protection of the Israeli people. 0 Israeli military deaths. Not a single plane hit. Not a single Israeli warplane or warship or any military installation on the Israeli home front or otherwise struck throughout the entire course of this war. Absolutely astounding, guys. Amazing. Unheard of. Never heard of it. So it would certainly seem that divine providence, that the Lord is, at least still for now, has his hand on Israel in an incredible way, and at least since the day of October 7th, the massacre of October 7th, has given Israel resounding success on all fronts. On the Gaza front against Hamas and the different jihadist groups on the West Bank, and against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and against the Houthis in Yemen, and against the IRGC and the Iranian regime on the Iranian home front. All around, amazing, unbelievable success. And although we would have all loved to see the Iranian regime fall and see something like a new democratic government, or maybe a royal monarch, some kind of democratic monarchy arise out of the ashes of that, and certainly we would want that for the Iranian people more than anyone else, but mostly for Iran and Israel. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that happen yet. We can't imagine that we don't have intelligence agencies like the CIA and Mossad working on that behind the scenes. President Trump has said that it's not his goal for regime change in Iran. I can't believe he would thwart it or block it. I don't know. But for now, the regime is still intact, but severely defanged, you could say. Severely chastened. Maybe even dysfunctional at this point. We don't know. What we know is Grand Ayatollah Khomeini was hiding out in a bunker, kind of like Osama bin Laden style, in a cave with no electronic communications, and just hoping and praying he doesn't get airstriked to death by the IDF. So we don't know how much in control he is. He is also elderly. We don't know how, we know he's appointed several successors or potential successors, including his own son. So, and it's not just him, but the entire council of Ayatollahs that runs that government. And, that sort of, it's not really can't really call it a government, so to speak, but there is the president of Iran and the parliament of Iran that have some sort of limited powers domestically. So all of those institutions, as far as we know, are still intact. But the primary institutions and the primary targets that Israel was concerned about, that is missile defense, ballistic missile capability, the nuclear program, and IRGC and the Basiji that have been persecuting the Iranian people, and the Quds force of the IRGC have been completely defanged and currently pose no threat to Israel at all, really, whatsoever. And Israel has made it clear, even today, that it intends to keep it that way by any means necessary. The only caveat to that is there is one site known as the Pickaxe site near the Natanz facility. Natanz is where most of the advanced centrifuges were housed. That site, it is believed, is at least a uranium storage facility, if not a production facility. And that site is believed to be much deeper than even the Fordow site that was built by Iran in response to the knowledge that the United States was building these MOPs, the massive ordnance penetrators. So it was kind of like, the United States government figures out they're building these deep underground, 100-meter deep facilities at Fordo. So we're going to develop this bomb that can penetrate under the rock to reach that facility. And Iran goes, oh yeah, well we'll do you one better, and we're going to build an even deeper facility near Natanz that you can't reach with even that bomb. So there's this sort of upsmanship that's happened over the course of the past decade between the U.S. government and the Iranian regime. And so checkmate on Fordow and Natanz and Isfahan. But there is this one facility it's a smaller facility, but it's deeper enough underground in the mountains near Natanz that we don't have a way to reach it from the air. There would need to be a team that somehow accesses the facility on the ground. And it's believed that that may be where the estimated 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium is being stored, being kept for safekeeping. Only because that's the one place that Iran knows that the regime knows that they can put that material without it potentially being destroyed by the Israeli Air Force from above. So Iran does still, as far as we know, and we have to assume, still has several hundred kilograms of highly enriched uranium, enough to make several atomic weapons, between 10 and 15 uranium bombs. As far as we know, they don't have a way to enrich anymore. They don't have a way to enrich that uranium from 60% to weapons grade at 90%, unless they have centrifuges somewhere in some site that we don't know about. And as far as we know, they still don't have a way to finish producing and assembling the components of a nuclear weapon. So it's believed that we are now in a place where it would take Iran months, if not years, to reconstitute the capabilities that they had just before the beginning of this conflict. But who knows? We shall see. Israel has done all it can, at least for now, with the help of the United States Air Force, with a little help from their friends in the U.S. military, to have the best case scenario you could in this conflict without the fall of the regime. So that is, that chapter, you could say, maybe closing. You could see the whole arc now kind of taking shape between October 7th and this conflict, the 12-day war, kind of closing out to come to a close. So if it were, a Star Wars trilogy, you could say maybe the first movie is October 7th, and the middle movie is, everything that all the conflicts have happened in between, and then the blowing up the Death Star is blowing up Fordow, I guess. And so that's closing out the arc for that trilogy. But as we all know, if we're watching Star Wars or Star Trek or anything else, when you close one story arc and you end one trilogy, another opens. And now this conflict has paved the way for the rise of a new Sunni Arab alliance that was already, the early stages of it were being formed all the way back during the first Trump administration in the form of something that came to be known as the Abraham Accords. And that is now an initiative in the second Trump administration with Israel's agreement, and with the Iranian threat at least sidelined for now. That initiative has kicked into overdrive. And already in just the past few days since the end of the war, we're seeing all kinds of news coming out of, a phone call that took place between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu just a few days ago. A possible trip by Bibi to Washington, D.C. in a couple of weeks that we're waiting to see is going to be finalized by the White House or not. And a new website that I'm going to show you guys here in a minute that has gone up, sponsored by the Coalition for Regional Security, which I think is kind of a organizational arm of the Israeli government, that kind of highlights some of these new peace initiatives. And obviously since 2020, well, let's back up all the way. So Israel has a peace agreement with the Egyptian government going all the way back to 1979. So that's been in place for about 45 years. Israel has had a peace agreement in place with the Kingdom of Jordan since 1994. so about for 30 years there. Israel has had something like a peace agreement, the framework for a peace agreement, at least through the Oslo Accords, with what has become known as the Palestinian Authority, what grew out of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, going all the way back to 1993 in the West Bank. It's at least still functional in the West Bank, not so much in Gaza right now. And that's currently led, the current president of the Palestinian Authority is Mahmoud Abbas, who's stayed in office well past his tenure, but has chosen to do so for obvious reasons, because if there were to be an election in the West Bank right now, Hamas would win. And so I think with Israel's tacit approval, he's just kind of overstayed his welcome well past his term, to keep the not quite so crazy jihadis in power compared to the really crazy jihadis. That's how it works in the West Bank. So that all of those peace agreements have been in place for 30 to 40 years. What we saw with the Abraham Accords in 2020 was the addition of several other Gulf states that all until that time, their policy had been, we will not make peace with Israel until there is peace, there is a final Palestinian peace agreement and a Palestinian state. And it became clear by 2020 that just isn't happening. That using that as a condition for a peace agreement with Israel was just going to make, it was never going to happen. So several Arab states that have already cooperated with Israel politically and economically and militarily behind the scenes, unofficially, secretly, including several of the Gulf Arab states, came out and made it clear their intention to normalize relations with Israel, brokered by the first Trump administration, for different incentives. Each one of these countries got different incentives for doing so, including UAE, the United Arab Emirates on the Gulf Coast, aka Dubai, the tiny island kingdom of Bahrain off the coast of the Persian Gulf Coast, both very, very wealthy and very, very oil-rich nations, which Israel doesn't have any oil reserves, and that's a key component of this. And so now Israel has normalized relations with those two countries. You can fly to Dubai from Israel and vice versa, and there's consulates and embassies open, and trade relations and political relations and security relations between those two countries, military agreements. Also with Sudan in North Africa, just south of Egypt. Sudan's currently in the middle of a civil war, and the central government has kind of gained a foothold over the sort of jihadist organization there that's kind of strangely supported by Dubai, but that's a different conversation. But technically right now, the Sudanese government has a peace agreement with Israel. And so does the Kingdom of Morocco, all the way on the other side of North Africa on the Atlantic coast. So those are the four Arab nations that currently have a peace agreement with Israel. And it's been rumored that several other Sunni Arab states were talking to Israel and talking to the United States and the EU in the background also to join. And so that's been rumored throughout the Biden administration, but unfortunately they weren't really able to make much progress on that. With Trump coming back into office, and especially since October 7th, with the Gaza war, it's kind of on pause during the Gaza war. But as that war has been winding down, and as Israel has had such incredible success against Hezbollah, and now that we've seen the Assad regime fall in Syria to a Sunni, you could say Islamist, if not jihadist regime under Ahmed al-Shara, aka Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, that has also changed the dynamic with the Abraham Accords. And with Israel currently occupying a swath of territory on the Syrian side of the border to protect Druze communities there and to secure Mount Hermon, there is negotiation between the new Syrian regime under al-Jawlani, back-channel negotiations, I should say, between al-Jawlani and Bibi Netanyahu's government, again brokered by the United States. Al-Jawlani now has, his regime now has normalized with the American government, and the sanctions are being lifted on the Syrian regime, and the aid is starting to flood into that that country again for reconstruction and for, rebuilding infrastructure and maybe even potentially security cooperation against common enemies being Iran and Hezbollah, as al-Shura not only fought against the American military in Iraq for several years, but since coming back to Syria and leading Syrian al-Qaeda, and also HTS, which is a conglomerate organization of jihadis that eventually took over the government, has been fighting against the IRGC and Hezbollah as well. So despite the fact that this guy is al-Qaeda, even though he has sworn off al-Qaeda and claims to be a kinder, gentler version of an Islamist leader, he has nonetheless got that history. And because it has been a matter of convenience, the enemy of my enemy is my friend in the Middle East, and Iran being the larger perceived threat in the region, at least the more immediate threat in the region, Israel and the United States may be willing to do a deal with the devil that they don't know as well, in order to take care of the devil that they do know, which is Ayatollah Khamenei. But this has obviously opened another front of potential conflict. Now that the Republic of Turkey, led by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has become increasingly antagonistic towards Israel, even since October 7th, and has all but cut off diplomatic relations with Israel altogether. Turkey, I believe, was the first or second nation to recognize Israeli independence back in the 1940s. And so was Iran, ironically, under the Shah. And now both of those countries are the most antagonistic towards Israel today, along with Iraq, where it's illegal to support Israel on pain of death. And it was under the Assad regime until the fall of the Assad regime. So now Turkey, which is very friendly and with al-Jilani in Syria, has supported him for many years and in some ways bankrolled and backed his drive to Damascus at the end of last year, has a straight shot from the Turkish border to the Israeli Golan Heights. And al-Shura, although he claims to be a new improved version of himself, and a sort of moderate-tempered, I've learned my lesson kind of Islamist. It's a matter of whether or not you believe that about him, and certainly based on the actions of his guys on the streets of Damascus and other places, and the recent conflicts against Alawite militias and the Coastal Road massacre in March of this year, or against the Druze in southern Syria and in the kind of Druze enclaves around Damascus. He's made an agreement with the Kurdish administration in the east, but there's been some tension there as well. And the sort of, friendly, adjacent jihadi groups that Turkey sponsors, such as the Syrian National Army, have definitely been antagonistic towards the Kurds. Depending on who you ask, maybe not so reformed and not so friendly and moderate. So we shall see in the coming days. We've talked a lot about al-Jilani, and we'll talk more about him, obviously. You can see any one of the previous few live wires archived on YouTube for more about him. So right now, I'm going to switch over to my screen here. Hopefully you guys can still hear me okay. So we shared a graphic earlier today on the wire that's been going around the internet on a billboard in Israel that shows several regional leaders. And I'll bring up this picture here first. We'll go over that before we talk about the website. Getting there. Loading. All right, so the picture's a little grainy, but obviously this is President Trump here in the middle, and this is Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu here on the right. And then the guys that are already kind of kind of lost our picture there, didn't we? The guys we know that already have peace agreements, or the nations we know that already have peace agreements with Israel, including King Abdullah II here of Jordan, and Hamid bin Isal al-Khalifa over here, the king of Bahrain, the tiny island nation of Bahrain. King Mohammed VI of Morocco here on the right. I don't know if you guys can see my pointer here, but he's the guy in the fez here with the glasses. And then the Sultan of Oman right here, Hathim bin Tariq, currently does not have normalization with Israel. So this billboard giving a hint that maybe Oman is one of the nations looking to join the Abraham Accords. Oman has been friendly towards Israel and has been kind of arbitrating talks between Israel and Iran during the recent conflict instead of Qatar. This is President al-Sisi here of Egypt, who already has a peace agreement with Israel. This is President Mahmoud Abbas here in the glasses up at the top on the left, who is a president of the Palestinian Authority. Right here in the Kaifa, next to Trump, is Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's already been widely reported that Saudi Arabia is in talks to normalize with Israel. That's really going to be the sort of crown jewel of the Abraham Accords here coming up. And the sleeper, the dark horse, the surprise horse here at the end of the race, Ahmed al-Shara, a.k.a. Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, the president of Syria, is in talks with the United States to join Israel in the Abraham Accords. So, obviously, this raises a question, and several of you have already asked this question. Considering who al-Shara is, and how we've talked about him being a potential candidate for a certain somebody portrayed in the Bible by several names as the Assyrian or Gog of Magog, or the man of lawlessness, or whatever you may be. And if you haven't seen it already, we went through Daniel chapter 11, verses, I think we started at verse 21, and went through about verse 35, and we talked about some of the characteristics and qualities and exploits of that particular man early in his career, and how you might be able to recognize who he is, which we're not near a place where we can do that for sure now. But we found that, he kind of checked some of the early boxes for that. He is a king of the north, according to Daniel 11, and he does fit some of the description of those early verses 21 through 25. Although we're way too early on in this stage of things to know if he is that figure. But the question is today, if he joins the Abraham Accords, could the Accords be the covenant with many? And could, by him joining them, be strengthening that covenant, which would be fitting to the language of Daniel 9:27? And my answer to that is, sure, maybe, why not? Yes, it could be. Again, and we've talked about this. I'm going to switch back to the camera really quick. We've talked about this before, and I just want to emphasize this again. I think there's a middle ground here, guys, between the ditch on the left, which is who knows what's happening. I mean, we have no idea what's going to happen. We're all pan-trib. It's just going to pan out. Nobody can understand the book of Revelation. Nobody can understand, Daniel 7 through 12. Nobody can understand Ezekiel 38. No one knows when the rapture is going to happen. Blah, 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 blah. That is absolutely not true. We can know a lot of things about the return of the Lord, and the Lord commands us to know these things. As he gave that command in Matthew 24 to watch, especially in regards to certain prophetic signposts that we are to be aware of. Why? Because then we know when he is at the door. We know when the bridegroom is at the door, and especially as we get into the harder, more difficult days where we have to endure. This is the devotional, pastoral aspect of my live wire today. As we get closer to that day, the day of the Lord, the day when Jesus splits the skies and comes down and judges his enemies and rescues his covenant people, and so we will be with the Lord forever. We shall be like him when we see him as he is, meet him in the sky. All of those wonderful scriptures that we hold on to, our blessed hope. We're going to need endurance for that, meaning we're going to need to know what to look for before that comes. The Lord's giving us directions, signposts to look for on the way. And even at some point, we'll have a timetable, roughly a certain number of days, 3.5 years, times and a half a time, 1,260 or 1,290 days, depending on, how you calculate and which scripture you're reading. 42 months. So we're going to need those things in the future. It's not going to be like, oh, it just happens when it happens. No. If you're looking forward to something, you're going to want to know how to tell when it's going to happen. And if we are looking forward to the return of Jesus, if we have the Maranatha cry, then we're going to be paying attention to these scriptures, not so that we can make a Bible chart, not so that we can impress people at parties, although that's kind of cool too, and not so that, we can go to all the prophecy conferences and know all the things and have it all mapped out, because that's the other ditch that I'll talk about in a minute. But we do want to know what we can know, and one day we'll have to cling to what we can cling to in order to make it through to the end, because he or she who endures to the end will be saved. So you want to make it to the end, guys. You want to endure to the end. It's not just about when you were saved. It's about how you will be saved. You are saved, you are being saved, and you will be saved. And the will be saved aspect of it is enduring to the end. And some people won't, and their faith will be shipwrecked. And whether you think somebody can lose their salvation, or whether you think somebody can never lose their salvation, the fact is people walk away from Jesus. And when things get hard, the Bible already tells us the love of many will grow cold, and people in the church will betray each other. And people will walk away. There will be a mass exodus, according to Jesus in Matthew 24. And if y'all don't want to be one of them, if I don't want to be one of those people, we're going to need to endure to the end. Whether that means we were never saved in the first place, or we were and we lost it, whatever your theology is on that, the result at the end is the same. You don't make it. You are not saved in the end. And I don't know about you, but I want to be saved at the end. And if clinging to these things and knowing these things and being one of the masculine, one of the wise ones, gets me through to the end, then amen and amen, guys. I'm going to stay out of the left ditch. Now, the right ditch, the other ditch is this. You become a sort of prophecy nerd who needs to know all things Bible prophecy. And there's this tendency to want to map things out and to know how things are going to unfold, even between now and the beginning of the Great Tribulation at the midpoint of Daniel's 70th week. I'd say the Bible gets pretty specific about how to know that that's happening. And that is when we see that man of sin, or we see whatever shall be recognizable as the abomination that causes desolation on the wing of the temple, as Daniel portrays 4 times in his visions in Daniel 7 through 12. When we see that on the wing of the temple in Jerusalem, the believers in Judea need to get out, and we know that midpoint of Daniel's 70th week has begun, and it's the sacrifices are cut off, and the man of lawlessness sits in God's place in the temple, thereby declaring himself to be God, according to 2 Thessalonians 2. And then the real deal kicks off for 3.5 years, and it's going to be a rough ride for all the covenant people, both the natural branches and the engrafted branches. So from that point on, the Lord gives us a very good roadmap with times. Before that, we have some details. We know that there will be this covenant, probably an actual peace deal, covenant with many that is affirmed by the little horn, the man of sin, for 7 years. Probably for a stated 7 years, based on the way that the verse is worded. We know that the daily sacrifice, the olat sacrifice, the morning and evening sacrifice of the lamb will resume. And when that begins, there is a specific timeline that Daniel gives us for the rest of all the events leading up to the Lord's return and the rededication, recleansing of the temple when the Lord returns. So we know that will happen at some point. We don't know. We can't know, and this is one thing we just always assume. Well, that 7-year peace agreement will be Israel, the beginning of the sacrificial system again. We don't know that for sure, guys. It's maybe implied by Scripture, but not explicitly stated. And we have to be careful not to read into Scripture what it doesn't say. It doesn't necessarily say that. And so that's why we have to be careful not to fall in the right side ditch, and just map everything out on a Bible chart. Some people even go as far as to say, well, the next step after this is Iran, the Ram, is going to invade Turkey, and then Turkey's going to do this, and then this is even before the 70th week begins. Guys, we have no flipping idea. Pardon my Francais there, but we have no idea what's going to happen between now and the beginning of the 70th week. If I asked you 2 years ago, or if anybody asked me 2 years ago, what's going to happen between now and June 27th, 2025, none of us would have predicted October 7th, at least not in detail. None of us would have predicted anything that's happened past then, including the war that just ended a week ago. So as I always say, the one rule of predicting what's going to happen in the Middle East is don't try it. The only thing that's certain in the Middle East is that nothing is certain. And until these events start to happen and unfold in a concrete way, we just don't know. And even when they start to unfold, it might not be clean and obvious. Now, I do think that the Lord is in many ways making these things more obvious, just as a witness and a testimony, both for us as believers and as a warning for the world. Like, it's right here, right in front of you guys. It couldn't have made it any plainer. So I do believe, for the most part, we should be able to recognize these things when they happen. But the world is messy, guys. We don't know for sure. We don't know for sure how these things are going to unfold. We don't know if a peace agreement is going to come first for 7 years, or if the sacrifices are going to come first, or if one's going to lead to the other, or exactly the timing of all the things. Like, we just don't know. So let's just kind of hold to, like, we know what the signposts are in general. The Lord's intentionally a little bit more vague about the things that come before the Great Tribulation. And because we just don't need to know as much about that. That's the factor of faith that comes into this. So we trust the Lord that when the time comes, when that covenant with many is confirmed by this man for 1/7, if we know where to look, and unfortunately more than half of the church in the world today doesn't know where to look. Most of them, excuse me, I just bumped my mic. Most of them aren't expecting any kind of future tribulation. Millennial or post-millennial believers in the churches, Catholic Church, Orthodox churches, Anglican Church, most of the Reformed churches, many of the Protestant churches that are post-mill, aren't expecting necessarily any kind of upcoming tribulation at all. And those who are, many of the premillennial ones, futurist premillennial churches, don't teach that he's going to come from the Middle East. They teach that they don't know necessarily where it's going to come from, or they don't teach about it at all, or they teach it's going to come out of Europe as some kind of revived Roman Empire. So already, guys, even if you know where to look, you're already in the minority. If you know that the prophets are pointing most likely, I'd say, most likely, to a region of the Middle East that encompasses Turkey, Syria, and northern Iraq, according to the prophet Daniel, and the prophet Isaiah, and the prophet Ezekiel, and the prophet Micah, and you could say tangentially in some of the other prophets. If you already know where to look for this guy, you're already in the vast minority in the churches. And even more than that, it might be kind of hard to identify him. We don't want to just, we have to be very careful to avoid the pitfall of saying, oh, that's him. We should not attempt to do that until that covenant has been confirmed. And I'd say even possibly until sacrifices begin and that man starts to reveal himself according to the narrative of Daniel 11:21 through 45. When we see this now, Al-Jilani has done multiple things so far in his quick and sudden and almost military and politically ingenious rise to power in Syria that looks a lot like Daniel 11:21 through 30, we'll say. But there's several wars that take place there. 2 wars prior to the beginning of the Great Tribulation. We haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen him confirm a covenant yet. We haven't seen sacrifices begin the date. And I'm not talking about any old sacrifice. I'm not talking about the red heifer sacrifices, which would begin the process of cleansing the Levitical priesthood for resumption of the sacrificial system on the Temple Mount. But right now, Israel doesn't have religious access to the Temple Mount. They control it politically and security-wise, militarily, but they don't control it religiously. They have given up that authority to the Jordanian Waqf, and you aren't even allowed, officially anyway, to even pray or sing or do anything that appears to be religious on the Temple Mount if you're a Christian or a Jew right now. That has to change first. And there at least has to be some kind of altar with some kind of reconstituted rededicated Levitical priesthood performing the morning and evening sacrifices on the Temple Mount in order for that prophetic requirement to be met, in order for us to be able to start the clock of Daniel 8 and Daniel 12, regarding the sacrifices, morning and evening sacrifices. That hasn't happened yet. So, good point, Emily. You could say, if it's a covenant for 1/7 and that's 7 years, you look at the number of days that it says total between the beginning of the resumption of the daily sacrifices and the rededication of the temple, and it's 2,300 days, which is just short of it's about 6.5-ish years. So you could say sacrifices might begin at some point after the beginning of the resumption of, or the beginning after, a few months after the beginning of the 7-year peace agreement. We don't know yet. So are the Abraham Accords that covenant with many that's going to be affirmed by that figure? Is Al-Shara that figure that will affirm that covenant? Is that covenant going to allow or give the Israelis the international credibility and ability to be able to sacrifice on the Temple Mount without causing a war in the Middle East and some kind of diplomatic uproar? We don't know yet, but it's kind of starting to look more and more like maybe. I can say possibly. I don't know about probably. I'm not quite at probably yet, but I'm at possibly. The number 7 has been thrown around several times in terms of making an agreement, a separate agreement with some Arab nations and in regards to the Gaza Strip, for Hamas to get exiled and for Arab nations to govern the security of the Gaza Strip and for the Palestinian Authority to eventually take over the course of a 7-year period. So that number has been floated publicly several times. Again, we have no idea if that's the one or if it's just a hint or a possible forerunner or prefigurement of it. We don't know. But that number has been floated. And I even saw it today, talking about security agreements that will last somewhere between 5 and 10 years that are coming out of these the Abraham Accord negotiations. So the Lord is definitely narrowing the funnel here. And at some point, I'd say when we see these things line up, when we see the covenant affirmed, and we see the sacrifices begin on the Temple Mount, I'd say at that point, we can trust that the Lord will make it clear that we're in Daniel's 70th week, and that he'll make it clear who that man is, whether it's Al-Shara or somebody else that has not arisen to the forefront yet. So we're just going to have to trust that the Lord showed us, and then our job as in the church, and you could say the sort of collectively awakened church, our job is going to be this sort of collective role of Jeremiah, warning the ingrafted branches in the churches, but also the natural branches in Israel, and that primarily I think will happen through Messianic churches. I pray it will anyway, through Messianic believers inside Israel. That at some point, as Joel Richardson talked about recently, Israel's not only going to have friendly relations with its neighbors, which is great. I celebrate all these peace agreements. That's all great. But what we know from the biblical pattern, that cycle of covenant chastisement and blessing that Israel has with God, is that repeatedly throughout its history, going all the way back to the Davidic dynasty in the land of Israel in ancient times, has always tended to put its trust in, first of all, itself, its own government, and its own military power, as it is right now. I mean, Israel has an incredible military, possibly the most advanced, successful military, second maybe only to the United States. And in terms of intelligence apparatus, even better than the United States. It's got this incredible democratic political system that's somewhat dysfunctional, but so are all democracies. It's now reached its sort of zenith, you could say, in terms of stability. It's won this incredible war. It's completely neutralized all of its immediate threats, with the understanding that, and even the Israeli government admits Erdogan's regime in Turkey could be a threat, and is potentially its next biggest threat. But right now, there's nothing like, that maybe there's some issues with possible deconfliction over Syria. But if there's a deal made with al-Shara's regime and Israel withdraws from Syrian territory and doesn't continue airstrikes in Syrian territory, then that would seemingly be another threat taken off the table from the north. And so, expect a few maybe more surprises in that regard. And then for the first time in its 80-year history, Israel's looking at peace on all of its borders with all of its neighbors. Never in its history has that happened. It will have reached its zenith of power and of affluence and of security and of everything else. And then what we might see at that point is just exactly what the prophet Ezekiel writes about in chapter 38 of his scroll, which is that the land is recovering from war, and that it has become a land of unwalled villages, whether that's literally that the walls get taken down, or metaphorically speaking that Israel begins to kind of celebrate and let its guard down and assume that it's safe on all of its borders. We don't know. But there will be this sort of euphoric, and think about it, guys. Think about how euphoric that will be for Israelis. Think about how euphoric it will be for not just Israelis, but Jews and even many Christians and even some Muslims around the world and many other people around the world to see the temple rebuilt. I mean, talk about a period of incredible euphoria and celebration. I can absolutely see how there will just be this sort of worldwide outbreak of peace and safety, or at least a message of peace and safety. And the man at the helm of it all right now, at least, Donald J. Trump, promising to bring peace in all of these conflicts around the world, with Iran, with Russia and Ukraine, and in other places around the world, and with China and Taiwan and everything else. He's the art of the deal guy who's looking to make peace. And it seems like we are barreling very quickly towards this time. We do not know for sure. I don't want to fall on the right side of the ditch, but I'm just looking and watching, guys, and I'm praying, and we should all be praying that the Lord gives us clear discernment in this. We want to be the ones who are ready to hit the ground running when this time begins, so that we can be that collective Jeremiah to warn the churches and warn national Israel that they have put their trust in chariots and horses, that they've been putting their trust in their neighbors. Historically, biblically, prophetically, Israel has always put its trust in its neighbors to the south, in Egypt, to protect it from the neighbors to the north, whether that's Syria, Assyria, or Babylon, or anyone else, the Romans. There's always this sort of agreement with Egypt or other powers in the south, and it feels like it has this bulwark of security. And then just when it doesn't expect it, the invader comes from the north, catches them completely off guard, and overwhelms them, floods through the land. And that last great time, the greatest time, the tribulation, the great one, as Jesus called it in Matthew 24, begins. Unlike any time of chastening and like any time of suffering for the Jewish people, or we as the engrafted covenant people in the history of the world. So severe that the Lord would need to keep it short for the sake of the elect, as he says in Matthew 24. Okay, that's all I have to say about that. So one chapter closes, the next chapter opens. We've had peace, we've had war, we've had spycraft, we've had intrigue, we've had things launching all over the Middle East, we've had demonstrations and marches and people going crazy in the streets of countries all over the world. Starting to get a little hilly on this roller coaster, guys, a little bumpy. We've done a couple loop-de-loops. And good thing that the Lord, by his Spirit, by his word, can keep us strapped in for the long haul of the ride. All right. I am getting short on my time here. I've got a Shabbat dinner to run to. So before my wife yells at me in the chat, if anybody has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and I will take a few minutes to answer them. We'll go for about maybe 5-10 more minutes. Gabe and crew are spot on, though. Thank you, David. Daniel 2 Nebuchadnezzar statue, iron, 2 legs, Rome split into 2 in 39 AD, 69 AD. Yeah, that's a good way to see that. I've heard it, maybe posited several ways. One of those being the 2 legs could be the Sunni and Shia divide, which are the main 2 sects of Islam. This would be a period of time. We know from Ezekiel 38 right now, several of the nations in that Ezekiel 38 coalition are either Sunni or Shia, Iran, Persia being the Shia majority nation. So there's at least this sort of temporary coalition between Sunni and Shia, led by Gog of Magog, who manages either through peace agreement or through military conflict. We know he has wars with several of the 10 horns early on in his career, possibly the wars described in Daniel chapter 11, verses 21 through I think about 30 or so, where he has to subdue 3 of the horns, possibly being Egypt, Libya, at least eastern Libya, which is currently Egyptian friendly, and Sudan, which is also Egypt friendly. Those may be the 3 horns that he has to subdue, or there could be Iran or maybe other nations, we don't know. But out of those 10 horns, he has to subdue 3 of them militarily, and then there's at least temporarily this iron mixed with clay, this sort of fragile political and military coalition under what we would consider to be this reconstituted modern caliphate. We don't know exactly if that will be the form of government, but in this part of the world, we would assume that to be it. And so al-Shura, whether that's him or somebody else, leading this coalition in its invasion against Israel, we know Iran will be part of that. So those 2 legs of that statue could be either Sunni and Shia, the 2 main sects of Islam, could be the 2 halves of the Roman Empire, as it was stated. Actually, the Roman Empire was divided in the 3rd century, in the 200s, for the first time anyway, right before Constantine's reign, and then Constantine united both half of the empire again. And for all intents and purposes, the real center of the Roman Empire then became Istanbul, or at that time, as it was known, Constantinople, Byzantium before that. And so Constantinople really became the main city of the Roman Empire after that. And it was after the Roman Empire split again, it became the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, aka the Byzantine Empire. And long after the western half of the empire fell to the Vandals and the other barbarian tribes in the 5th century, you had the Eastern Roman Empire surviving, the Greek Roman Empire, you could say, where they spoke Greek, in modern day Turkey, which Western Greek or Ionia was, Western Turkey was Ionia, or you could say Turkish Greeks, all the way up. They would hate you that you call them Turkish Greeks, but that part of what is today Turkey was Greek majority all the way up until the 20th century, when the Turkish Empire, the Turkish Republic, led a genocide against Greeks after World War I. But until then, it was majority Greek. And so the Eastern Roman Empire, the Greek Roman Empire, survived all the way until the 15th century AD, just a few hundred years ago. It was eventually conquered by the Ottoman Turks. And so really the Romans, who were the you could say the heirs of the Greek Alexandrian Empire, gave way to the Islamic Caliphate of the Turks in the 16th century, 15th century, when Constantinople was overthrown. So you could say that the capital of Rome today, of the capital of the Roman Empire, moved from Rome to Constantinople, and that today, as it's known as Istanbul, is the seat, that sort of, I don't know how it works in the spiritual realm, when cities or authorities move around from one city to the other. We do know that certain principalities and powers are assigned to nations and are assigned to cities. We know that from Daniel. So it would seem that potentially that that Constantinople or whatever authority arises to rule over Constantinople or over Istanbul eventually, that could be what prophetically you could consider to be the revived Roman Empire / Islamic Empire. That could be both together, because Istanbul straddles, literally the city straddles the European and the Asian continent. You can go to both sides of the city. Question. That's one of the issues with al-Shara, though, is he's the president of Syria, which is a much less powerful and smaller and weaker nation compared to Turkey. How he would end up leading Turkey isn't exactly clear. It's definitely not with Erdogan leading it. Something geopolitically would need to happen in that future confederation, either leading Turkey by confederation or directly leading the government somehow in some sort of empire, or who knows. But that something like that would need to happen in order for him to truly, for his empire to truly encompass that entire region that the Bible points to. Okay. Any questions? Who are the 144,000 Jewish people and not Gentile? Yes, we would say they are Jewish people. Revelation 7 and 14 is very specific about them, not just being some random 144, symbolic 144,000. There are 12,000 from each tribe. So unless you want to go as far to say that's just symbolic or spiritualized language, my answer to that is always, okay, explain how. How does that make any sense? Then other than just say, 12 is a perfect number, 144,000 is a perfect number. Well, that's quite a few verses to list out all 12 tribes of the Old Testament to say it's just some perfect, round, inclusive number of 144,000. Why not just say 144,000 from each of the tribes? Why list out the tribes by name, one by one, and say 12,000 from each? Much in the same way that the Lord did through Moses in the book of Numbers. If you read in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, or in the book of, it's several times in Numbers, before and after the wilderness wanderings, there's a census taken of the nation, and it lists out the number of the heads of the families of each tribe by number. So many from the heads of, chiefs of these tribes, from this tribe, and this tribe, and this tribe. So really the writer, the obviously Jewish writer of Revelation, who is a John at least, and traditionally John the Revelator, John the Apostle of the 12, is obviously a Jewish guy who knows his Old Testament very well, his Hebrew scriptures very well, and either directly quotes them or alludes to them in almost every verse of the book of Revelation. Follows the pattern of the Torah in Revelation chapter 7 and listing out the numbers that are preserved from each tribe during the tribulation period, and who stand with the Lord on Mount Zion at his return, that have this special gifting and function at the Lord's return. They're preserved through the Great Tribulation. Whether or not they have some kind of function during that period, we're not sure. Whether or not they're even believers during that period, we're not entirely sure. But we know that they are preserved throughout that period, that the Lord has marked them, and he will not allow the Great Tribulation to begin until they're marked and preserved, much like we read in Isaiah chapter 9, before Babylon invades the city of Jerusalem and destroys the temple. There is a vision given to Ezekiel chapter 9, where Ezekiel sees this vision of an angel going around and marking the foreheads of all these people that are to be preserved throughout the destruction of Jerusalem and the first temple at that time. So the Lord will do the same during the Great Tribulation. All these things are just greater versions of what the Lord has always done in his chastisement cycles. So just as he's always done before, the Lord will preserve a remnant through that time. If you believe that number, as described in the book of Zechariah, is about 1/3 of the nation of Israel, in the land of Israel. We don't know about outside of Israel necessarily. But in the land of Israel, if you believe that verse is in regards to 2/3 of the nation being cut off and killed, and 1/3 being preserved, we know at least 144,000 guys, let alone, their families or they're virgins. I know that it's described in Revelation 14, which by the way, that word could be translated either to mean virgins as never having had relations with a woman, or having only had proper marital relations with a woman, just as in the Old Testament, that word for maiden or virgin that's translated in the New Testament in regards to Mary could mean either maiden that has never had relations with a man or a maiden who's only had relations with her husband. So there is some linguistic leeway there for them to be married and have children. But either way, even if it's only 144,000 guys, and that's the only Jews that survive in all the world, we know that there will be at least 144,000 Jewish men, women, men from each tribe, 12,000 from each tribe, preserved through the Great Tribulation to enter into the kingdom of God. So I would say that's just John recalling the Torah and making it clear that that's a literal 144,000 Jewish people. Follow up, are there any more questions? Oh, I just lost it. Follow up, are there any more questions? Sorry, guys, I lost my place here. All right, sorry, I got to move on here. I lost that one. Beast will destroy the woman who rides it. There's something I hope to understand a little more. I would suggest, if you want to understand Mystery Babylon a little more, our own resident New York Times bestselling author / teacher / woodworker / traveler / tour guide / bad pastor exposer, I guess. I don't know what you would call that. Champion of the small guy and disenfranchised and victims in the church, Joel Richardson, has a great book on that topic titled Mystery Babylon. Get it, read it. I think that's the best way. There is a mystery there, hence the name, that we can't know for sure exactly who the woman is, the harlot that rides the beast. But he comes up with what I think is probably the best scriptural interpretation of Revelation 17 and 18 and some parallel passages in the prophets. Torah speaks of the end as well as the beginning, absolutely. The Torah, or the books of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy, is the kernel or the seed of the Hebrew scriptures, just like the gospel is the kernel and seed of all the New Testament, right? So everything you would need to know is in seed form in the Torah. Everything you would need to know is in seed form in the Gospels. And really, the Torah is even seed form for the Gospels. So it all goes back to Moses and the Torah. Tom the cat, I believe I can fly. He believes he can fly. Didn't get the Christian practice. I don't get the Christian practice of circumcision. I don't know if they're well, biblically, off topic. I'm not going to get too far off the rails. Paul makes it clear that Gentiles are not required biblically to be circumcised for covenantal purposes. You might want to get your kids circumcised anyway for health purposes. That's my public service announcement for the day. Can we mute this Tom the cat? Oh, Tom's just having fun here, guys. I don't know how to do that. I've never had to kick anybody out. Would it be something geopolitical, or would it be something supernatural that would make Turkey let al-Jilani lead and become Gog? Just thought, yeah. I would say it'd have to be both geopolitical and supernatural. I think everything geopolitical that happens has a supernatural, spiritual, invisible element to it behind the scenes. And again, we know this, especially from the prophet Daniel, that everything that happens in the world, there are principalities that govern these nations and these leaders of these nations behind them. Even the United States, guys, I'm really sorry to say that, but that is just a fact. There's only one nation that we could say that genuinely probably doesn't have a principality and a power assigned to it, a demonic principality and power assigned to it, directly anyway, and that would be Israel. And scripturally speaking, that may be, according to Daniel chapter 12, the archangel Michael that currently floats, stands, I don't know what he's doing, but is over the state of Israel, protecting the covenant people and the covenant land. At some point, he stands up and moves out of the way in order for the Great Tribulation to begin. So, certainly Israel's influenced by principalities and powers. You can see that. Just go to Tel Aviv, and you can see that for yourself. Or even Jerusalem. It's influenced by both very licentious and very legalistic principalities and powers, because those are both tools of the enemy, right? But every nation on earth has these, you could say, social, cultural, political, economic strongholds that come, I would say, that are coming from religious as well, that are coming from principalities and powers behind the scenes. So anytime we see something manifesting, I hate to use that word, but anytime we see something appearing in the physical realm, geopolitically or otherwise, militarily, economically, socially, religiously, it's always being governed behind the scenes by principalities and powers. When the devil took Jesus to the high mountain and showed him the nations of the world and said, I will give you authority over these nations if you will but bow down and worship me. That means he has authority over all nations of the world. And as one of my favorite preachers once said, he wasn't bluffing. He could actually do that. Paul calls him the God of this world. And he's not leashed, as many in the church believe, according to Revelation 20. He's not currently on a leash. He's not currently in a pit, in the bottomless void, being kept for judgment. He is out roaming the earth, prowling around, seeking whom he may devour, passing to and fro from the earth, as it's stated in Job chapter 1. So he's got his minions who may not always get along with each other. We don't know all the dynamics of that, and they probably don't. But the fact is, they are the ones behind the scenes doing this. And so when Jesus comes to judge the nations of the earth, he's not just judging human authorities. He's judging principalities and powers. And we know from Revelation chapter 20 that Satan is bound and cast into the pit. The beast and the false prophet are killed and cast into the lake of fire. And all human and demonic authority come under the subjugation of King Jesus and are not allowed. Human authorities are ruled with the rod of iron, and demonic authorities are held and bound for 1,000 years until the great white throne judgment. Spirit who is now at work in the sons of disobedience. Exactly. Remember, Israel has been scattered to all the four winds. Yes, and they are also being regathered to the land. Roughly about half of the 14 million Jews in the world today are in the land of Israel. Most of the rest are in the United States. In fact, there's almost as many Jews in the United States as there are in Israel. New York City, we've talked about this on The Wire. New York City has the second largest population of Jewish people in the world, of any city in the world, after Tel Aviv. More Jews live in New York City than in Jerusalem, which makes the upcoming New York City mayoral race in November very concerning when you consider the very anti-Israel, pro-BDS Democratic candidate. Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions, just Emily's snarky comments. Thanks as always, Emily, for keeping them in line. What else? You have moderators, then they can mute people. Sorry, no moderators, it's just me. It's the one-man show here. I'll figure out how to do that, though. I'm not the most... it's weird. I have IT certifications, guys. That's kind of my day job, but doing the live streaming thing is not my cup of tea. As you might be able to tell, as I'm sitting in my office with a concrete wall behind me and my son's microphone that he uses to play online gaming sitting in front of me on my laptop. That's the extent of my streaming prowess here. All right. If that is it. Okay, I got a Shabbat dinner to go to. It's 5:30. My wife is probably blowing up my phone. Anyway, as always, we love you guys. I think that's enough for now. I don't know if this is going to happen every 2 weeks, but as I've said, we're going to try to get on a somewhat regular cadence here at the EMMAUS Wire, and hopefully soon we'll have that published for you, so you know at least how often I'll be with you. But absolutely, as big things happen, as wars begin or end, or big peace agreements begin or end, or sacrifices or whatever else, or if I just get bored, maybe, then we'll do a live stream. I don't get bored very often these days, but you never know. Anyway, great to be with you. Talk to you soon. Love you all. Blessings. Shabbat Shalom. Gut Shabbos, excuse me. Whatever else. Aloha. Buonasera. Have a good night. Peace out. Love you guys. Maranatha.